Hello and welcome to another edition of Sun Dragon Tips and Tricks. I'm Rebecca. I'm the owner of Sun Dragon Art and Fiber in downtown Brevard, North Carolina. It's the first Monday I'm filming of 2023 and I'm at my house and I'm also getting over a cold. So I'm keeping the filming light because I'd love to get a video out for y'all, but the whole whiteboard, all of that stuff is a bit beyond my energy at the moment. However, I thought it would be fun to make a video for you of how I close off the tops of my fingers. This also can work for the tops of hats. When you've decreased down to like 8 stitches or less, and it tells you to draw the yarn through the remaining stitches, and sometimes it says to do that by putting it onto a sewing needle. I'm going to show you what I do without a sewing needle currently that also helps the top be nice and tight. Because sometimes if you just thread through those remaining stitches, like right here, I have 5 stitches left. And sometimes when you thread through those remaining stitches and pull tight, they all kind of pull, but there's still gaps between all the stitches. If you've tried to do the top of a hat, you may know what I'm talking about. Sometimes I draw through twice with my sewing needle to at least make sure that the top is not going to open back up again. But I'm going to show you today what I do so those remaining 5 stitches aren't so loose, because that's what leads to the gap, is that the stitches are like this when they're, so I've got to do the little 4 or 5. They're like this, but there's still the space in between because these stitches that you've pulled together are not tight. When they're really tight like this, when they're smaller, the loops are smaller, that can keep the edge of your finger, the tip of your finger, super, I got this all, I have to sew my ends in. But if you take a look at these tips, they are really tight. There isn't a whole lot of holes in them. Again, this isn't as thorough of a video as usual where I have a sample where it didn't work right and all these others because I'm a little tired. I'm trying to catch up on my rest. This is one where I've sewn all the ends in, and if you take a look, if I can get it to focus, all the tips there are pretty tight. So I'm going to show you how I do that with just my needles. This can work for double points or a magic loop or 2 circulars or whatever method you do to get way down tight like that. And you know what? Let's get to it. So my first tip on something like this is I want to work in the same direction as if I kept knitting. If I kept knitting this in the round, my yarn is right over here. If I wanted to keep knitting in a circle, this would be the first stitch. And then I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the first thing. In some ways, it's because the yarn is connected to this stitch right over here. If we think about this as stitch number 5. Stitch number 1 is the oldest stitch. On our last go round, which might have been a decrease round, this was the first stitch of the round. And then I kept going around. You don't want to go back the way you came because then this stitch could end up super gappy. You want to keep going in the same circular motion you've been going in this entire time. I would do the same thing if I broke the yarn here and put it on a sewing needle. I would go in the same direction through these stitches. I'd put the sewing needle in this one first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, and pull tight. Again, that means that all of these stitches, if I pull hard enough, they might all pull up really super tight. But if we want it to be as tight as possible and as least gappy as possible, here's what I do. Every stitch as I come to it and pull this yarn through it, I'm going to pull tight. Each next one is going to pull the one before it tight. So let me show you what I mean. First of all, this is my tail, even if it's still attached to the yarn ball. This is my tail. I'm going to just drape it over the tip of my needle, where if I kept knitting, I would knit this stitch. drape it over, and the way I'm gonna pull it through, I'm actually going to take another spare needle and I'm going to catch, if it helps, think about it, I'm going in purlwise, and I'm gonna purl it over that scrap yarn and off the end. It's kind of like a bind off, but it's a different direction than you might be thinking about binding off. That usually happens over here. So I like this yarn because it's different colors. So I've pulled that first, remember, of looking at these stitches going in a circle, I pulled stitch number 1 over my scrap yarn, my end yarn, and my end yarn is kind of an orangey funky color. It's not purple. So stitch number 1 has been pulled through stitch number 1, or stitch number 1 has come off and over, whichever way makes more sense to think about. Now stitch number 2, here's my stitch number 2. I'm going to pull this one over my tail yarn here, which again is a different color. But before I do, so I'm going to go in purlwise to this loop. But before I do, let me move that so we can see what's going to happen. I'm going to pull on this stitch. And did you notice it pulled the one I've already pulled off? It pulled that one tight. This one's really big now. That's okay. I'm going to pull it over that scrap yarn, that tail yarn again. That's stitch number 2. Stitch number 1, we almost can't even see anymore. It's time for stitch number 3. So I'm going to put my right hand needle in, purlwise. I'm going to pull it tight, which means it's going to pull the stitch before it tight. And I'm going to lift it over that tail yarn. I finished one of my needles. Now, if we look at it from the top again, I've got a really big loop here. I'm going to ignore that for a second, that really big pink one. This pink one, that is stitch number 4. That's my next one. My tail yarn is on this needle. I need to, we can rotate if we want to, if it helps to think about this, just like if we were knitting. Rotate so that stitch number 4 comes up to the end of the needle. This tail yarn, I'm just going to stick on the edge of the needle just like it was on this needle. I don't need that one anymore. Again, I'm ignoring the big loop here because I've already cast it off basically. Here's stitch number 4. I'm going to put my needle in purlwise again. I'm going to pull it. As you see, it pulled stitch number 3 up tight. I'm going to pull it over the tail yarn and let go of it. Push it out of the way if you need to. One stitch left. Put your needle in purlwise, pull on it to pull stitch number 4 nice and tight. Pull it over your tail yarn and let go. Now at this point, you're probably saying, but I have this big, huge loop. What am I going to do? The reason that we started with the oldest stitch, number 1, and went around in the same direction as knitting for number 5, is now if we pull on this tail yarn, it's going to pull that guy really tight. Because that stitch that was left really, really big, the yarn from that stitch was immediately going into your tail yarn. So I have done all of these without breaking the yarn to the big ball, but you can if you want. It means as you pulled on that, you might have pulled your tail out of all those stitches too, which is good, like the tail end. The part that did the sewing into it is still through all those stitches. What I'm going to do now, because I hadn't broken that, as I will, you can cut, or some yarn, if you yank hard enough, you can break. Now I can keep, now that I've pulled stitch number 5 tight, I can pull my end through and take a look at how tight that is. It's really tight. What I will do now is I will get a sewing needle. I don't have one here, and I will put it through the center and pull this yarn into the inside. And I might do a little loop or a little knot. It depends on if you like feeling that there, but there's ways to tack this down now. So that, see, here's my other thumb that I've already sewn the end in on. I tacked it down a little bit here, and then I sewed my end down, and honestly, I can't even tell where I did it. I have other videos on how to sew ends in. If you'd like a refresher on that, let me know. I'll do one if I have time. But this is the one I wanted to do for you all today to show you. Like I said, this can work really well for the top of a hat if you don't want a hole in the top of a hat. Now, you do need to take this yarn to the inside and weave your end in and tack it down so it won't come out. But this is a really good start to having a tight seal at the very top of your hat or the top of your fingers for these gloves. This one, I believe, was my right hand glove. So now I have a full set, especially once I weave all my ends in. And my last video before break, it was on the underarm of a sweater. In fact, the sweater I'm wearing. But it had the theory on how to sew these ends. If you take a look, I've got gaps between all my fingers where I picked up new thread. It's really hard not to have those, but you can sew those shut because here's the gap on one I haven't sewed shut yet. And I don't have that on the one that I finished. There might be a little bit. Sometimes you can't get rid of everything, but yay, I finished my gloves. I'm ready for colder weather. So thanks for joining me for the video on how to close up the ends of fingers in gloves, or also the tops of hats when you're knitting. I'm gonna work on sewing all these ends in. I've already done it on this glove, so I have a full set of gloves to show off on our other YouTube channel, the Sun Dragon Sideshow. On Tuesday morning, I will be demonstrating these with Liz. That's my little, our kind of talk show podcast with Liz, my assistant over at Sun Dragon. If you appreciate the work that we're doing, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. At least give this video a thumbs up. We also have memberships on this channel, and we have patreon.com/sundragon. Either of those for a monthly subscription, monthly fee. You get your name on the credits at the end of here. We appreciate all of our patrons and members. Thank you so much. We appreciate everyone who watches, really. Thank you so much for supporting this channel. Let me know if there's other videos you'd like to see. If I can, I'll make them. Like right now, I'm trying to get this gone, so I'm trying not to overexert myself with all the editing and filming and all that kind of stuff, but there'll be more coming. We're also about to do a cable knit along at Sun Dragon. It's really a community-wide, just knowing everyone's doing the same thing as you are. We have a Facebook page where you can share pictures. If you send in pictures, I will put them on the Sun Dragon Sideshow right before the comments. We'll put them in our newsletter. The focus of the cable one, I mean, any cable project is awesome. The focus of this one, if it needs more focus, if you want a narrowed down selection of patterns and to know maybe someone else is doing the same pattern as you, what I've decided to do this January 2023 is Tin Can Knits just recently published a whole bundle of cable patterns. The name of the collection is called Lazy Sunday. And the reason I picked the collection, you don't need to get the whole collection. You can buy specific patterns or the whole collection on Ravelry, or you can contact the shop. If you don't have a Ravelry account, we can get patterns for you. There's such a wide range. There are fingerless mitts, there are hats, there are cardigans, there are pullover sweaters, there are shawls. I'm making the baby blanket version of one of the shawl patterns, Tarn, right now. One of my most recent finished hats and mitts are from the pattern, from the collection. So there's a lot to pick from. I figured that was a really great way. If you wanted to try some cables out, you could pick the pattern that excites you the most and do it. I had the question of, if someone's new to cables, where should they start? I recommend one of the smaller projects, like the hats or the mittens or the socks, as something if you're just learning cables rather than a bigger project. But I think they're all wonderful. I hope in the next few weeks to get I already have some cable videos on this channel. but they were made several years ago, so I may be doing some refreshers on cables and how to read a cable chart and how to make cables go in one direction or the other. So look forward to those videos. I need to get some rest first. I need to kick this cold, and being self-employed and trying to kick a cold sometimes takes a little longer than you'd like it to. So anyway, as I always like to say when we finish here, may your crafting be filled with joy and confidence. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.